Ah, I'm not Bill. And I will never be Bill. But I'll try to bring something for us this morning. Let's start with a prayer. Sacred mystery, please let us use our minds to engage our thoughts and actions in compassion and connection in lieu of comparison and competition. Let this intention allow the divine indwelling in us be freed to dance in peace, love, and harmony. Amen. So Bill contacted me, I think, late Wednesday and asked me how I was about last-minute teaching. And so we're doing a little experiment to see how good that is. So I had a talk that I did for Bridget's Place not too long ago where I really described the Enneagram and how we use it in transformation. So that's going to be part of the talk. But I titled this talk, Sacred and Scattered. Now is the time for us to change our minds. I was looking for a really intellectual, beautiful quote by Neil deGrasse Tyson for this, and what I came across was this one that says, I don't know if it's a good or bad thing that on a Google search, The Big Bang Theory, the sitcom comes up before the origin of the universe. I've been studying Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Sorry, let me back up a little. This is my inaugural voyage with trying to use technology the way Bill does. There we go. It surprises me sometimes how the largest and the smallest things have some type of familiarity or continuity, whether it's cosmic, whether it's in what we can see in our daily lives, or whether or not it's cellular. There's some kind of continuous familiarity with the way things look. And what I've been learning about with Pierre de Chardin is that at every level, there's a force that's seeking to unite us, to pull us along in evolution and transformation. One of my favorite quotes of his is, matter is spirit moving slowly enough for us to see. You have to sit with that one for a minute, don't you? And so I think that psychologically and socially, there's also big bang collisions. There's scattering and reforming, reshaping and transforming at every level. And that but in this realm, unlike cosmically, we can be trained to see that, and we can be part of the evolution and transformation that happens at this level. We can choose to unite what's been scattered. One way is to understand and free ourselves from our thought patterns, our judgments, and our attachments. So, I've put it on its ear and said, instead of the big bang, maybe it's time for us to do the big nab, where we gather back everything that's been scattered. Teilhard de Chardin says that people who follow Jesus, or I like to think anybody who's following their own path towards spiritual enlightenment, they become whole makers, uniting what is scattered, creating a deeper unity. So, what do you do to train yourself to turn from comparison and competition and things that make us collide and bounce off of each other more towards compassion and unity? In William Blake's work, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, he says, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. For man has closed himself up till all he sees that he sees all things through narrow chinks of his cavern. In James Finley's book, Christian Meditation, he refers to this quote as a description of how meditation works to help us be patient and realize this lifelong learning process of becoming one seasoned in meditative awareness of the divinity in daily living. That's a really action-packed sentence, isn't it? So let me say that one more time. I feel like I'm screaming. Is it as loud to you out there? It's okay? Okay. I'm going to read that sentence one more time. It's a lifelong learning process of becoming one seasoned in the meditative awareness of the divinity of daily living. That sounds like it's really congruent with ordinary life, right? So, my question to you is, are we willing to mindfully choose growth and connection over the consistency and attachment to the way we normally respond to things? There's a reason that we respond the way that we do. Our patterns are automatic, and they give us some level of comfort and predictability. But are we ready to move beyond that? Are we ready to change? Or do we need to suffer to a certain degree before we're willing to be pulled into this awareness? Are we comfortable enough with our attachments that we're willing to just cruise along with them until something strips them from us? Is uniting all that's scattered really not our problem until something's made it our problem by an unforeseen circumstance? Are you okay with that? I think that's the big question when Bill talks about us doing spiritual practice. I think the question is, are we okay with just cruising along, or are we motivated to become more active in this transformation? Let's say we are okay. Let's say we're not okay with it. Let's say we're ready to do something different. So here's the question. How do we become more conscious of our patterns so that we can outgrow them? One of the tools that I've actually learned about it for the first time in this class back in 2008. Jim and Jory Mansky were visiting, and they did a little workshop in Houston on compassionate communication. I know I've plugged it several times in here. It's also called nonviolent communication. It's the work of Marshall Rosenberg. And he really did a lot of work in the 70s on it for peace and justice. It's been used in the UN. We use it in parenting. It's been used in pretty much every level. It helps us understand our commonality. So the very basics of it, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I could give a 15-hour workshop on it. But at least, and I'm still learning every time I look at it, but it's based on the fact that we all have the same needs. And these move beyond Maslow's hierarchy of needs that starts with sustenance and protection and security to all of our variety of needs. Let's say in a perfect world, we wouldn't have, however percentage, 85 or 90% of the world having to really focus on those protection and security and where's my next meal coming from. But if everyone had the benefit that our bubble has, and everyone could try to get these needs met, this is what that list would look like. And I know you can't read it because it's fuzzy, but some of these lists are survival, sustenance, nurturance, purpose, meaning, contribution, freedom, choice, creativity, clarity, learning, authenticity, peace of mind, balance, ease, beauty, harmony, celebration, mourning, leisure, play, understanding, connection, acceptance, love, compassion, cooperation, community, mutuality, support, and many, many others. So one of the basic tenets that comes after understanding this, I mean, we could probably sit in silence and just kind of sink this in. You know, the next kind of step in understanding compassionate communication, or NVC, is that every choice that we make, consciously or subconsciously, is an attempt to get one or more of these needs met. So you think about the guy that's zipping in front of you on the highway. You think about your 2-year-old throwing a tantrum. You think about the decisions that are made in the White House or whatever. Everything we're doing is an attempt to get a need met. Usually it's a variety of these needs met. And then our conflict is simply when our strategies, when the choices that we make collide with each other. And we perceive that someone else's choice is interfering with our attempts. That's where the conflict is happening. It's not happening at the level of who you are or who I am. It's happening at the level of what we're choosing to do to try to get these met. So when you talk about psychology and you talk about how we perceive things, you have to bring in that each one of us has a different perception of what it feels like to have these met fully. So we can get into a lot of arguments and discussions about whether or not you should have that need met, you know. But really we're the ones that perceive whether or not these are met for us. No one can tell me if I'm doing enough to meet my need for meaning and purpose. I'm the only one that knows what that feels like for me, and you're the only one that knows what that feels like for you. So that's why people can be in exactly the same situation and circumstance, but feel very differently about how satisfied they are in that situation. So, we get into a little bit of trouble when we get attached to the strategies that we use. Let's say until we're 20, 25, we've done the same things to get these needs met, but then all of a sudden, they're kind of colliding with other people's strategies, and we have to change the way we're doing something. Let's say we get married, and all of a sudden there's conflict in our relationships. It's conflicts because we've been using different strategies all this time, right? And we need to open up our ideas and collaborate on new strategies to get these needs met together and honor each other in that way. If we become too attached to our strategies, then it's difficult to grow. And that's one of the reasons why I think this work is very much an opening for spiritual enlightenment as well. Because we can look at what we've been doing, what we're attached to, and our ways of thinking and perceiving these needs. For instance, if you were able to imagine yourself with every single one of these needs, and what this list is not by any means exhaustive, if you were able to think about having every one of your needs met at any given point, how would that feel? I mean, to me, that's heaven on earth, right? We'd be completely blissed out if we had all of those needs met simultaneously. What if 50, 60, 70% of what's keeping us from doing that is our perception on what we need to feel like that? So that's where, to me, psychology and spirituality can really come together and help us work beyond what's holding us back from really sensing heaven on earth. So, let's see. One of the ways that I think we're able to stay conscious of this is to really be in the present moment, to kind of catch ourselves and recognize what's holding us back from this sense of being blissed out or connecting with another person at this level. And that's why I get I love to teach different spiritual practices because it begins to allow us to get closer to this. And meditation really helps me get trained to catch those automatic responses in action so that I can shift them. So I think when you look at the wisdom that's provided and this understanding, and you have the ability to be in the present moment, when you've done a little bit of work and you have the self-awareness, you have self-understanding, and you have acceptance, then you can begin to see and hear things in new ways that make you less defensive, less anxious, and you can come to the moment with open hearts and open minds. Then you have the opportunity to have a wide variety of strategies possible by yourself or with others. I think I already kind of covered this one on the why meditate, but it's not about what happens while you're being in meditation. It's about how we become more aware and more able to engage in the present moment by taking that meditation with us, by it being in us the rest of the time. Bill has used this graphic a few times, and I realize that I may use this graphic in every presentation I do because it really helps see the big picture. And when we're talking about transformation, this is just such a great graphic for that. And you might not be able to read the small words in the back, but this is what Richard Rohr uses. He calls it the cosmic egg. And it talks about our transformation process. The smallest piece in the center says, it's my story. So that's where we're really looking at what's just me. Life is all about me. It's my private small life. And I'm searching for significance through power and prestige. So this is kind of like, look at developmental stages. This is where, it's all about my story. And then we move beyond that into our story. And that's where we really begin to understand who we are in relationship to others. And we have group dynamics. There's nationalism. There's ethnicity. No, wait. Yeah, that's right, ethnicity. We have group identities and loyalties. And this is where when we get attached to our group thinking, then our tribal thinking can keep us from moving into the next level, which is the story. It's the big story. And this is where we really understand what is. It saves us from the illusion of the we, of the tribal thinking, and the smallness of the me story part. And this is where I think we really get into the, when you can see the big picture at this level, then you can really let go of there's only one path and it's my path. When you get to that level, you can really see it's all feeding into the same, there's no word for it, so there you go. Skipped. So, there we go. So I just popped this slide in there this morning before I came because I couldn't figure out how I was going to talk about this without this one. So there are talks you could give on those fine little lines in between my story and our story, right? So what keeps us trapped there? I think it's a lot of what's going on under the water. It's a lot of every past experience that we've had, every way, our brains has assimilated information and has guided us to make the decisions that we make. And so I don't know if you're familiar with the Jungian, Carl Jung used this iceberg analogy to talk about what's above the surface, which is what everybody sees, and what's underneath, which is all these patterns and all the information and data that's been collected, and that things, I've studied this under a couple of different psychologists, and there's a few different ways of looking at this, but that this is our unconscious, and I think Bill talks about, I don't know what the percentage is, but this makes decisions for us a lot. And I think spiritual practice allows us to pay attention to these things as they pop to the surface. When you're sitting, trying to sit silently in meditation, and you start to notice but not get attached to the thoughts that come up, not only do you practice not getting attached to those thoughts, you can also start to recognize what are those unique patterns that are making those decisions for me without me knowing it. You can become familiar with them enough so that you can transform them. And so, what do? How do you transform those ideas? For me, one of the best resources for doing that is the Enneagram, because if there's a root motivation, if there's some patterns that are part of who we are that we can catch in the moment, then we have the opportunity to take a step away, and rather than use that information to rationalize our behavior, we use that information to transform how we're going to respond in the moment. So let's see. So I think that helps us navigate from the my story part to the our story part and beyond. So I don't want to get too far into the Enneagram because I think a lot of you guys are familiar with it, but I was going to kind of run you around the wheel real quick. And I'm using pictures from our family, but there's 9 root types, and they are the perfectionist, the helper, the achiever, the romantic, the observer, the loyal skeptic, the adventurer, the protector, and the mediator. So when you start to study the Enneagram a little bit more, you can start to see that there are thoughts that come up that we respond to. And the more you know them, the more empowered you are to shift and grow beyond them. I'm looking at the time. I might just kind of skip through these. But a couple of them are, there's only one right way to do things. I help others that need my help. I'm at best when others acknowledge my achievements and performances. Something's missing, and I have to find out what it is and get it. I need to be alone and to preserve my energy. What's going to happen next? I'm going to start with the what's going to happen next, number 6, loyal skeptic one, because that's the type I am. And so I wouldn't probably be able to stand up here right now if I hadn't been able to kind of catch my thoughts. The number 6 motivation is fear. And so this would be probably overwhelmingly scary for me. And I'm a counterphobic 6, so I can jump right in. But I'm much more effective if I use that fear to transform my thoughts and work with it rather than against it. So one of the tools that I learned about, I learned it from Robert Gonzalez, who teaches nonviolent communication as a spiritual practice. And this was like a 3-day retreat, I think, and this one practice was worth the hours and hours of workshops. And I've taught it in different ways now, and I just wanted to share it with you guys this morning. So this is what I call the I'm telling myself practice. So I don't know if you recognize when you're triggered by something, it could be anxiety for something really wonderful that's about to happen, or it could be in conflict with another person when you're really anxious, but you notice a body sensation that says, ooh. You can if you can stop and recognize what thoughts are going through my head right now. Is it, I'm not good enough? Is it, I'm not being respected? Is it, these are judgmental thoughts. These could be positive or negative judgmental thoughts. If you're struggling with pride, it could be, these are harder for me, but it could be, I'm better than so-and-so, or I'm farther along, or whatever. It could be these prideful thoughts. But if you can catch them in the moment and put I'm telling myself in front of that, then you can distance yourself enough from that thought so that your actions and decisions are not driven by that thought. You can take power back from it. So if I said, if I responded to the thought, I'm not wise enough to be Bill's substitute teacher this morning, if I had responded to that differently, I wouldn't be right here, right now. I would hopefully be out there somewhere, but instead I could say, I'm telling myself I'm not good enough. And that may or may not be true. I'm telling myself that the other person's not listening to me. That may or may not be true. How much different do you think your reactions would be if you only heard that message and you responded to that? If I think someone else is not listening to me, I'm going to respond very differently than if I say, I'm telling myself that person's not listening to me, but that may not be true. I better check on that first before I respond as if it were true. I think a lot of our disconnections come from that moment, and meditation can help us recognize it and see the patterns that we do so that we can transform those beliefs that change our actions. There's a Catholic priest, Father Philip Kirchhoff, who, I'm skipping this slide. I think I talked about that enough. Father Kirchhoff brought Luke 10:38-42 scripture to a retreat that I did in the fall, and his message about it was so radically different. I wanted to try to use that as an example this morning. So this is from The Message by Eugene Peterson, translation of Luke 10:38-42. As they continued their travel, Jesus entered a village. A woman by the name of Martha welcomed him and made him feel quite at home. She had a sister, Mary, who sat before the master, hanging on his every word. But Martha was pulled away by all she had to do in the kitchen. Later, she stepped in, interrupting them. Master, don't you care that my sister has abandoned the kitchen to me? Tell her to lend a hand. The master said, Martha, dear Martha, you're fussing far too much and getting yourself worked up over nothing. One thing is essential, and Mary has chosen it. It's the main course and can't be taken from her. I've heard this verse used a few different ways, and most times it's used in comparison, comparing Mary to Martha, comparing the work of one to the work of the other. And there's lessons to be learned in looking at that in that way, but Father Kirchhoff brought it to us in a totally different way. He said, in the Cloud of Unknowing, back up a little bit, in the Cloud of Unknowing they used it to talk about contemplation and action. So going into the contemplation part a little bit more, Father Kirchhoff said, what if the work was equal? What if Martha's special gift to give in the present moment that day was working in the kitchen? What if Mary's special gift and offering that morning was being at the Master's feet? What if we think about Martha went wrong only in the moment where she started comparing herself to Mary? Where she told herself that Mary's not doing what she ought to be doing. What if she's a type 2 on the Enneagram and really got a lot out of helping other people, but rather than being resentful about the help she was giving, what if she was able to say, I'm telling myself that Mary's not doing the important work. I need all this help in the kitchen. And that may or may not be true. And she was able to just keep on doing what she was doing, but doing it out of love instead of out of competition or comparison. So, I think I talked a little bit about using the Enneagram for living more into the story. What if we can channel the specific gifts that we have into the opportunities that we have in the present moment? I think we start to feel a shift, and we become more peaceful and empowered, because as the Zen master who's joined us a few times says, our thoughts are what's causing our suffering. It's keeping us from what truly is, and that we have the power to change that. And I believe that being able to shift from my story and my specific interpretation of what's going on into the bigger picture also gives us enough grounding so that we can be with others with who they are. And I wanted to share this video. So what I wanted to share with you is just, knowing that I'm a type 6 and fear really can make me respond in ways that don't really come from my soul. I had an experience after studying nonviolent communication for a while and getting to know my patterns and things by working with Judy on the Enneagram. I realized that I was so scared living in our house in our neighborhood. And what scared me were the gang tags on the houses, and we've got small children. And I realized that coming and going from the house was making me have a very fearful response, and I was very judgmental of the guys in our neighborhood that were like 18 to 25 and dressed a certain way. And I've always thought I've always tried to be very open-minded and not discriminate, and why can't I move past this? And so I challenged myself to look at them differently and to stop the way I was thinking. And so what I did was I realized I was telling myself a story that may or may not be true, and that when I meet strangers in the streets otherwise, I nod at people, I smile at people, I don't have a problem connecting with people, and I usually kind of do the namaste nod, and I've shared a lot of sweet smiles with other people, and I really need to bring that to this situation. So I had our kids and I were on vacation for a month, and my husband met us at the airport with all these great shoe polish messages all over the car about welcome home. And so one morning I pulled out to the busy intersection, and with, back in the routine with the kids going to work and school and everything, hadn't washed the car yet. And I pull up to the intersection, and there's this guy ambling towards me with, an uneven kind of strut going on. And I'm dressed a certain way, and I just thought, what? I'm telling myself this guy's a gang member. I'm telling myself, he wants to steal my car, whatever. And no, that may or may not be true. How am I going to respond to this? So I made eye contact. I didn't take the little window of opportunity to zip out in front of him and get, on my way when he was crossing the road on the sidewalk. I made eye contact. I gave him the nod, and I waved him across. And he lit up. And he had this big smile on his face, and exuberantly, all the way across the front of my car, he was saying, "Welcome home." And I have taken that little story with me ever since then, because it was perfect. That's the message. That's what happens when we can transform our way of thinking. We're greeted, and I thought, Being home is not about stepping over our threshold. It's about realizing that we have the opportunity to be home when we go the other direction, too, when we step outside of ourselves and our safe little homes that we've created over time. I think that's the place where we come into contact with being with and part of the indwelling that's within each of us. So I've come across this practice lately that I love, that's rewriting a psalm. So this is Psalm 27 that I rewrote while I was coming up with this talk. Love is the light and the way through patterns and prejudice. Love is the strength and freedom from the way that it's always been. When thoughts and judgments attempt to inform my next move, each one will be met with the light of love and freedom. In the throes of fear, doubt, and shame, and their pursuit of my attention, I will remain assured, and my soul will let love overcome them. So I can end with this. This is a poet by Hafiz, who's a Sufi poet. Now is the time to know that all you do is sacred. Now why not consider a lasting truth with yourself and God? Now is the time to understand that all your ideas of right and wrong were training wheels to be laid aside when you can finally live with veracity and love. Now is the time for the world to know that every thought and action is sacred. That this is the time for you to compute the impossibility that there's nothing but grace. Now is the time to know that everything you do is sacred.